Hello my dears, welcome to another, oh goodness, Sydney is debunking a lot of research video. Glad to have you. This idea is based on a 90-minute-ish video essay by Mooncat that I watched a month or two ago, and while watching it I kept thinking like how much that applied to disability, and I wanted to make a video on the topic for my channel, and then I also bounced off of her research in that video to try and branch out and make this more of my own thing that's an addendum. And I ended up landing on the exact same articles and the exact same data that she referenced in her video at least 5 or 6 different times. So I ended up giving up just trying to be original. This is based on, this is gonna be like a broad overview of her points, and then I'm gonna bring into how that ties into disability in general and autism specifically. And I still highly recommend that you watch her entire video essay. I have now seen it 3 times to help research for this video and also just for fun. I truly learn new things every time, and I've linked it at the top of the description for you, so you should go check that out. But before we get into debunking everything you learned in your social skills lessons growing up, hi, my name is Sydney, my pronouns are they, them. I am an openly queer, disabled, autistic, trans, non-binary actor, composer, educator, media analyst, and disability advocate that is getting easier to say video by video. I'm currently working on a thesis about disability education, media, theater, performance, accessible education, and basically anything else in any and all of those categories, and it is culminating in the world's first all-nerdy virgin cast and crew production of The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. You can learn all about all of those things at the links in my description. And audio description, I'm a white person in my early 20s with shoulder-length, light brown curly hair. I am wearing a light-ish green shirt with a dark green button-up open on top, and I'm sitting in front of a bookshelf. All right, body language. Now, as an autistic person, I am all too aware of the fact that I miss critical social cues. Often those critical social cues being ones that involve tone and how people say things that they often don't mean, and I don't pick up on it, whether that's lying about information or promising something that they don't intend to follow up on, or being nice to me with the full intention of turning around and complaining about me the second I walk away. I don't pick up on those things. I do more now than I used to, but when I was little I really didn't at all. And growing up with this general knowledge of myself, and that was a thing I wasn't able to do, when I would hear people talk about how like a certain direction of eye gaze means somebody's lying, or like if their feet are pointed towards the exit it means that they don't want to talk to you, or if their arms are crossed they don't want to open up to you and they don't feel safe around you, I saw those things as my keys to unlocking human interaction. And I made sure to study these things, and even if I always couldn't keep them straight, I'd try to copy these body language rules to try to get other people to understand my intentions and to try to comprehend theirs. And I assumed that like if I couldn't master verbal communication skills, I could at least master body language skills, and that would make up for it and it would be all okay. But as much as I wrote those things down and I worked on them and I paid attention to them, it felt like they were both inconsistent and also didn't really make any difference in the quality of my communication. And also, they were impossible to remember. So I kind of ended up giving up on them as a tool, and I just like moved on with my life. Occasionally I would dip back into the world of body language experts to try to glean some information when my confidence was feeling kind of low, or when I wanted to study something for acting because I am an actor now, but otherwise I kind of just left it and moved on. And then I stumbled upon this video essay that I mentioned earlier that just came up and recommended for some reason. It made me think, I would love to know more about this, because I always felt like it didn't work, but I thought maybe I was just doing it wrong and it was my fault. So I decided to just hop in and watch a 90-minute video essay, which I don't usually do, but I'm very glad that I did. And I learned in that video that no, I was doing everything perfectly right. The science is just complete bogus. And the real world consequences of that bogus science are way more important than just a little small and sad Sydney who thought that their body language is broken and that's why they couldn't make friends. So today we're going to take a brief deep dive into the science that body language experts like to use, the wacky research that it's based on, and the terrifying reality of what this science is being used for and how it disproportionately hurts not only people of color, but also disabled people, and also very much disabled people of color. And then you can go watch the original video essay after you watch this, because it's really great and you should go do that and support other creators. Yeah, so let us begin with how body language experts do their job and the science behind it. This video is going to have a lot of air quotes in it. Now generally when we see people breaking down behavior, they're going to refer to 3 different things. The first is somebody's baseline, basically meaning a person's baseline behaviors based on how they would act or react in a normal situation, also referred to their behavioral profile at rest. The second thing that we're going to see is clusters of behavior. Like they're never talking about one behavioral change, but rather a cluster of different behavioral changes being tells of some situation. And then the third is microexpressions, which are authentic facial expressions that last less than half a second and expose somebody's true emotions. Also, when body language experts are breaking down behavior. The only reason that they are doing it 9 times out of 10 is to try to find out if somebody is lying or being deceitful. Like, body language analysts aren't really looking for anything else other than spotting a liar or detecting the truth. And a lot of them call themselves truth detectors, and it's weird. So the thing to start off with here is that, like, truth and lies it's a very hard dichotomy on its own, because people will lie and think that they're telling the truth, or they will tell mostly the truth and have like one wrong detail in it. So the line between truth and lie is so wishy-washy to begin with. And the fact that truth people, body language experts, think that they can read it through body language alone, and that I fully believed that growing up, is just wild to me. But is there science to back these things up? There are studies, but are they peer-reviewed? The ones that say that these tactics are ineffective are the ones that are peer-reviewed. We're gonna get into that in a bit. Now, the thing is, with studies of using different tools to tell the truth from lies and measure human behavior, the studies will automatically be very, very flawed to begin with. The first reason is that you can't ethically test with high-stakes lies. So data that says that somebody can use a specific skill to detect if a participant is saying that their favorite color is blue when it's really red isn't really applicable to any of the situations in which body language experts actually use this information, such as, say, police interrogations and murder situations, and analyses of famous people in interviews. The situations in these studies are not at all applicable to the real world, meaning that data extrapolation from the studies to the real world makes no sense, even if the data made sense, which it doesn't. It's also important to realize that in studies where somebody has a 50% chance of getting the answer right, your results statistically are going to be inflated anyway, and you can try to balance that as much as you want to prevent chance and whatever, but it's really hard to prove without a doubt that it is not chance or just slightly above chance, like somebody just got lucky, and that's not replicable or useful in the wider world. And more importantly, all the studies you read completely contradict each other, saying certain behaviors mean different things depending on the study that you read, which is comforting. Also, lots of examples of where body language analysis works are from analyses that happen after the situation has been cleared up and resolved, and experts are like, oh yes, you could tell that they are lying because they did these 3 behaviors. And that's kind of hard to prove wrong, because we already know that they were lying, because the case is already closed. So yeah, another thing that we see a lot of the time is people saying, well, it's not an exact science, but it's based on evolutionary psychology, which fine. But the thing with evolutionary psychology is that you can justify literally any behavior based on evolution in whatever way you so desire, and there's nothing really to contradict you. That's how we got all of eugenics. The one thing that is contradicting them is that most of the science they use to back this up is talking about how these skills developed when we only had our limbic system before humans developed the more advanced parts of our brain, and that our advanced brains are getting in the way of us using our natural instincts, and we need to learn how to use all of our brain at once. Which is not how brains work, and we very much know that. The conclusions that they draw are very based on the myth that we only use 10% of our brain, which has been so wildly debunked several times over. First of all, because like we can do brain scans and we can figure out that people are using 100% of their brain, and also why would we have so much brain if it were never used? That's how evolution works. So there's no weird lizard brain underneath with untapped potential that we've evolved past and need to go back. That's not how evolution works. No, one human is not more evolved than another. Whatever. Okay, the thing is, if you use semi-scientific explanations that are in line with preconceived notions of what people believe maybe could be true, people will believe you, which is why so much research got published in the past, like a lot of the past, that wasn't really peer-reviewed, because people just kind of went, yeah, checks out, and just let it continue on with what it was doing. Also, to be thorough, I always like to look at who funded the research to see if they might be, say, benefiting from certain results of that research. Also, if you want to learn how I dissect research, you can watch that video up here. But most of the funding for body language research comes from people who would monetarily benefit from people creating ways to be able to accurately detect deception. My personal favorite being the strong overlap between body language research and the False Memory Syndrome Foundation. And for a quick rundown of how false memories aren't a thing, let's take it over to former Sydney's video about gaslighting. Also, content warning for gaslighting and mentions of abuse and courtroom stuff. There is this study that is used constantly in courts of law that says that 15% of participants appear to develop false memories in implantation experiences, and the study is often used to exonerate abusers. But here's the thing that they don't say. In those studies, family members and other trusted witnesses in relation to the participant were the ones who were deliberately deceiving these participants, including the use of doctored photos and journal entries. So Who's moving all of their furniture right now? Anyway, basically, the only people able to implant false memories are ones who are very much trusted and who work really, really hard at it. And countless other studies show that victims of childhood abuse, especially those experiencing chronic abuse, are extremely likely to develop high levels of dissociative symptoms, including amnesia for abusive memories, which we've talked about before, with an increase in forgetting of abusive events for a period of time in 42% of abused individuals. And the majority of those individuals reported that at the time of that abuse, they experienced gaslighting and threats about telling anybody, or even they were told that this behavior was completely normal or not taking place at all whatsoever. So to clarify, foggy memory and dissociative symptoms are significantly more common in people who have experienced abuse, especially if it's repetitive or chronic abuse, which is the definition of gaslighting abuse. And it is also very common for abuse victims to forget that abuse altogether for a period of time, often resulting in latent realization, which is directly connected to threats and gaslighting at the time of said abuse. 15% of participants in a study developed false memories as a result of implantation experiments by a trusted loved one. But did you know that the CDC reports that nearly 26% of Americans have experienced verbal or physical abuse in their homes? Which makes it seem an awful lot like the 15% who had implanted memories probably had some sort of overlap to the abused population because, well, we're more liable to believing what other people tell us because we know that we're more spacey and more likely to not know what happens and that we're more dissociated. And did you know that the guy who funded the initial study was a guy who created the False Memory Syndromes Foundation right around the time that he was facing allegations of abusing his daughter, and that this whole section of science has been more or less widely debunked? Because I sure as heck did not know that, and I would have loved to know that during the period of time that I was convincing myself that I had false memories of abuse because I so badly wanted to defend my abuser. I also learned that in this rabbit hole of research, and yes, I did make this the topic for my final paper in this class because I knew that I was gonna have to research it for this video, and therefore made my final paper a byproduct of my channel to make myself actually motivated to do it. Oopsies! I learned that countless studies have actually shown that people raised as women are significantly more likely to experience child sexual abuse and other betrayal traumas, which are the types of trauma that are more typically related to dissociative disorders, forgetting, memory issues, and issues with recovering memory because it is typically more chronic and more likely to be forcefully hidden through threats and gaslighting. And that the perpetrators of said abuse are typically people raised as men, many of which have self-reported as having taken steps to make themselves seem more believable to others than their victims, again, making it more likely that these victims are going to be forcefully silenced or have foggy memories of those abusive events and not report it to others until long after the abuse has occurred. Especially because, well, just in general, due to society, neurotypical people and men are taken way more seriously than disabled people and women are, and that's just an unfortunate fact. Oh look! Somebody's using shoddy research for their own moral gain and monetary gain and managed to get it popular enough that people just assumed it was true, so it's in the general consciousness in a way that causes real harm, especially because it's used in legal proceedings. I wonder if, given that they're very much connected with body language research, if there would be any sort of overlap in that situation. Let us see. Let's go back to the idea of a baseline, yes? So, do people actually have a baseline behavior profile? Is this a thing that happens? Unsurprisingly, not in the slightest. All humans change their behavior based on the situation, based on the people they're around, just generally day to day or moment to moment. This difference is also, the difference between times is also often stronger for disabled people because our pain and discomfort levels are more likely to fluctuate than the general population, so we can physically function completely differently day to day. And there are, in fact, no sources that definitively support the idea of baselining, and some studies even say that body language experts working to spot detection based on baselines are more likely to be wrong than people just randomly guessing. So that's good. Since the second thing that we talked about, clusters of behavior, is usually in reference to cluster behavioral changes based on that baseline, we can also take that second thing off the table as a valid option. But what about the third thing? What about microexpressions? Well, that's exactly where the history of body language experts begins. Let me introduce you to the dude who discovered microexpressions, Dr. Paul Ekman. What a guy. So he's a performer. He's a former professor at the University of California, and he was the first guy to study human emotions at mass scale. I actually read a lot of his research back in my high school AP psychology class. I was told it was completely accurate and reasonable, and that's unfortunate because his research is so obviously a problem if you know anything about research at all whatsoever, and it's making me really question the the level of what I can trust that came out of that teacher's mouth, but that's my own existential crisis to have. Ekman was inspired by Charles Darwin, who theorized that all facial expressions were genetically determined and universal between all humans and even animals. Margaret Mead in the 1950s, with her anthropological research, disproved this so much, and she went, facial expressions are in fact dictated by culture and upbringing. And Ekman went, yeah, but I might test Darwin's thing. I just want to know. I just want to figure it out, you know? And meanwhile, we have DARPA, which is the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, aka the research agency for the US Department of Defense, aka the Military Research Agency. They were looking for new technologies for use by the military in regards to understanding human behavior, because it's a lot easier to figure out who to press for information when you can figure out who is telling the truth and who is not. And some might say that they were looking for a very particular set of results from any research that they would fund in this field, and that this would therefore say be, I don't know, a conflict of interest. But yeah, anyway, so they gave Ekman a big old grant, and they said, go learn about how we can profile people. Learn about facial expressions. And he was like, sounds good. So he traveled to a bunch of different countries around the world in the late 1960s, and he showed people flashcards of posed expressions like the ones that they use for autistic kids. And he went, hey, pick which emotion this is out of this word bank of 6 emotion choices. And then after that, he went on a trip to a remote tribe in Papua New Guinea, and he did the exact same test, and then he took photos of their expressions to show Western cultures to see if the reverse was also applicable. Also, his writings about the studies are kind of racist. This isn't surprising, but it is a thing to just a thing to note. He concluded that there are 6 universal expressions of human emotion. You know, the 6 expressions that he gave to people and said you have 6 emotion choices to pick from for these 6 emotions? Almost like he, I don't know, predicted his results before he started the study. Weird. Anyway, so from there he came to the conclusion that these 6 universal expressions are masked by culturally learned behaviors, and we can unmask them to find the true intentions underneath by looking at the micro-expressions that last less than half a second and expose somebody's true emotion. He then coded a system to universally detect and analyze human facial expressions, but it wasn't super useful because it had to be done with pen and paper, so it took absolutely forever, and that wasn't majorly practical for everyday Department of Defense use, so it was kind of ignored until the 1990s when computers became a regular thing that people had, and DARPA went, maybe we could use this to, I don't know, automate this process using machine learning. But they needed data to teach the computers with to be able to analyze human facial expressions, so labs around the country started collecting images based on these 6 universal categories. They used both staged ones and spontaneous ones, and also they were almost exclusively white people. So, not surprising that the basis of our whole AI, facial recognition is white people, and that we still have issues with race and AI. Anyway, by the time the system was complete, Ekman claimed that it would detect deception with an 80 to 90% hit rate, and it was widely seen as a legitimate scientific tool. So around 2009, he sold this technology to the CIA, the FBI, Customs and Border Protection, and the TSA. He also even helped to consult with Pixar for the characters in Inside Out. But let's talk about what happened when other people decided, maybe we should try to replicate his research and see what we can find. So first we have Lisa Feldman Barrett, a professor at Northeastern University who, based on her list of published research, seems to have dedicated her entire career to debunking everything that comes out of Ekman's mouth, and I love her for it. I have linked her website in the description, highly recommend looking through her papers, really fun read. So she reran his flashcard study without the word bank of 6 emotions to choose from, and found no correlation between cultures, or even within the same culture. So that's good. Then another professor, one who had been trained on Ekman's system, also tried to replicate his results out of curiosity with a different study, and he failed just as spectacularly. There was also a 2008 study on Ekman's work that found that microexpressions appeared in only 2% of the videos that they analyzed, and nearly half of those were displayed by people telling the truth, not by people trying to mask their true feelings. A 2019 study found that people trained on Ekman's system analyzing footage were overall slightly worse than chance in spotting lies, and also weirdly confident about it. And a professor went to Papua New Guinea to try to recreate that aspect of Ekman's original study and found absolutely no data to support it. Also, a 2018 mass literature review analyzing over 1,000 papers concluded that Ekman's system was backed up by little to no evidence. Oh, and Ekman refuses to do any peer-reviewed follow-up studies because he claims that doing so would threaten national security. So, that's good. Also, for a brief history of peer reviewing, a requirement for being published in journals nowadays, which is basically like other scientists read your research and they look at it critically to make sure that it actually holds up to standards of proper research, and make sure that you're not pulling claims out of nowhere so that it can be published and people can look at it and be like, yeah, this is reasonable. Peer reviewing as a concept appeared after World War II. Only one journal made it mandatory for publishing in 1973, and it didn't become commonplace until the 1990s, which means that 90% of Ekman's research came before that standard was set in place, during the time period that I like to refer to as the Wild West of psychological research. So I took it with a grain of salt anyway, but now it's worse. But you see, Ekman was not done, because sure, he may have made millions from selling his faulty research to the military, but he decided that he wanted more. So he decided to see if there were people who are weirdly gifted at human deception detection through body language, to see if he could maybe work backwards from them to figure out how to teach those skills to other people. So he ran a study, he called it the Wizards Project, where he tested 20,000 people and came out with 50 truth wizards, which sure is a word choice. Also, just for the record, other scientists immediately called him out for a flawed study structure and how that was skewing his results, but anyway, one of these wizards is selling courses teaching her skills for way too much money, like right now, as we speak. She also refuses to have her skills tested by anybody other than Ekman because it's already been proven, so what's the point? And she's also teaching these skills to police departments, which is comforting. Meanwhile, as all of his research is completely falling apart, the Department of Defense doesn't care because they invested in it, and it's a cheap solution for things, despite it being objectively an issue. The TSA still uses a terrorism detection program called the Spot Detection Program based on body language analysis, and the ACLU did some research into this detection program of late, and their key findings included that academic research and other documents in the TSA's own files reinforce that behavior detection is unscientific and unreliable. The TSA repeatedly overstated the scientific validity of behavior detection in communications with members of Congress and the Government Accountability Office. Materials in the TSA's files raise further questions about anti-Muslim bias and the origins and focus of the TSA's behavior detection program, and the TSA's documents reveal details of specific instances of racial or religious profiling that the TSA concealed from the public. Also, for the record, not a single terrorist has been caught through the system. They stop about 30,000 people a year, and they only arrest about 1% of those people, usually for things like drug possession or traveling with undeclared items, and never for terrorism. Not once. So, yeah, some signs that put you on their target list include exaggerated yawning, excessive complaints about the screening process, excessive throat clearing, widely open staring eyes, wearing improper attire for location, whistling as the individual approaches the screening process, gazing down, exaggerated or repetitive grooming gestures, face pale from recent shaving of beard, and rubbing or wringing of hands. So being an autistic person. But the biggest issue with body language research is what it means for policing, particularly with police interrogations. The most widely used police interrogation technique is called the read technique, a body language analysis technique that's used to get confessions. And it is very, very good at getting confessions. They're just usually false ones that wrongly convict people. So anyway, the read technique training materials are written entirely based on the experiences of law enforcement, not on actual evidence, and they also implement Ekman's nonverbal lie detection techniques. If they think that they notice deception cues from you during initial questioning, they'll move on to the 9 steps of interrogation. Steps that do very much include lying to the person and gaslighting them into confessing over hours and hours of psychological torture. They also often include polygraph tests, which, if you're wondering, are also widely accepted as completely bogus by the entire psychological community, and in interrogation settings are used almost exclusively as a gaslighting tool against the person. And studies have shown that people are more likely to believe somebody if they trust them. And studies have shown that people are less likely to trust people with the mannerisms of a culture different from their own or who are of a different race. So basically, Ekman's work and the read technique are emboldening officers to think that they know what they're doing and that they should trust that gut instinct, and they're just wrongly convicting people, mostly minority people. It's not a coincidence that 50% of people killed by the police every year have some sort of disability and or mental illness, and that about 65% of people killed by police last year were people of color. And that there's also a significant overlap between those two communities. But on a smaller scale, the way that body language experts dissect human behavior and say that this thing or that thing is a sign of deceit often further cements disabled behavior as flawed and deviant and something to be avoided or concerned about or see as dangerous. It perpetuates that odd and off behaviors are signs that something is fundamentally wrong with a human being. The amount of times that I've seen experts say something like, if you look at the way they hold their chin here, or the way that they fidget with this is a clear sign that they're a psychopath. And that's an issue. And here's the thing. We want to believe these things. We want to believe that our instincts are correct, that we are gratified and reasonable in our hatred and distrust of people. We want to believe that if we study these specific body language signs enough, we could save ourselves in a situation with a murderer. We like to think that us judging people based on real science is just that. It's science. It's not just us judging people or harassing them for no reason because we're good people. We would only do that if it had scientific basis. And most importantly, for so much of the audience of these experts, we want to believe that maybe the confusingness and messiness of human communication actually has logical rules that we can study and we can learn. And that's why I got into body language stuff to begin with. That's what gets a lot of people into it. We are the target audience here. But the thing is, the more we study this, the more self-conscious we get because we are analyzing ourselves and trying to control our expressions and our movements more to the point where we're unable to properly verbally communicate or listen to the other person properly verbally communicating because we're so distracted trying to piece out this body language communication that most of the time isn't actually communicating anything at all. Like, sure, body language holds meaning and it is an important part of communication, and sure, studying it might be really helpful if you're, say, an actor trying to craft a character's body language because you can manufacture a baseline for them. And sure, there are things to learn about it that might help you in social interactions with other people, but in regards to lie detection, most studies found that body language is effectively useless, and listening to what a person has to verbally say is the most effective tactic by far. And body language is so different based on person to person that, like, it's way more effective in the sense of noticing when your friend is sad than talking to a new person in a job interview setting. So at the end of all of this, you don't need to panic about having your feet pointed in the right direction or your arms crossed or uncrossed or whatever. Just, like, exist how you exist comfortably and focus on verbally communicating that, or communicating that in sign or with AAC or anything else and however you communicate. But don't depend on somebody's non-existent micro-expressions. It's not worth your time, energy, or money in the sense of asking other people to teach you that are just trying to teach you complete bogus, or the risk of perpetuating these all too prominent and extremely harmful ideas. So that's all I have for you today. I would love to hear your thoughts on this in the comments. I would love to know if anybody else also used body language analysis as their last ditch effort to try to figure out human communication, because I feel like that can't just be a me thing. Could be entirely incorrect on that. And you should go watch the other video essay because I highly recommend it. So yeah, as always, thanks for listening. Thanks for learning. Remember, it's never too late to start over. I look forward to seeing you, my dear, in the next one.